Cue. There it goes.
That is your cue. Take it away.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our session on empowering students to be digital creators. So today we'll be discussing the work that we do through the Digital Knowledge Center, aka the DKC. So you may be wondering, what is a DKC? We often get these questions at open houses. Parents come up to us, students, they're like, so what is a DKC? And in short, the DKC is this. At its most basic, it's a team, Cartland and I, and amazing student staff who support students learning digital skills and accomplishing their digital projects. And we consider ourselves aligned with the other academic supports here at the university. I'll quickly note too that we also do other things. We manage spaces for student creation, like podcast studio, 3D printing, video production, and we also support equipment checkout program so that all students can have access to nice equipment like DSLRs, audio kits, so that their projects can be taken to the next level. And we also support programs like workshops and fellowships, and that's kind of what we'll be talking a bit today, a bit more about. But I want to talk a little bit about why do we have a DKC? In part due to some of these people that you see on screen. The Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies here at Mary Washington was so successful that the group that was responsible for faculty development found that they were increasingly helping students. And in order to deal with that scale, it became necessary to think about, well, what would it mean if we could have a group dedicated to helping students? And when they looked around, the model of students helping students seemed the most viable option. So the DKC became a place that we could tell faculty, yeah, there is help for your students. You don't just get support, but your students get support too through these projects you're doing in your class. And this has become especially critical for faculty who may be hesitant to implement digitally inflected assignments, right? They're like, I don't know the first thing about doing video. They don't need to. That's why we exist. We can help them think about how to do that project critically, but then they don't have to be that support. The DKC exists to do that. So that's a little bit about the DKC. And before we start getting into talking about how we do this, let's talk a little bit about what digital knowledge is in the first place. So I'm gonna turn it over to Cartland to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. That's right. I'm Cartland. I'm going to move this fellow box. What is digital knowledge? So we're the Digital Knowledge Center, and we help people achieve greater digital knowledge. But there's a lot of definitions of digital knowledge that sort of are floating out on the internet. This is kind of the definition that we work with. The idea that we're helping students to consume, produce, and creatively adapt to emerging tools and technology. And that covers a lot of ground, right? Some very basic functionality, just like using basics of your computer, to advanced features of Photoshop or other digital creation tools, right? There's a wide variety here. We often quote this line from John Green, novelist and podcaster. Almost everything that we think of as dichotomous is in fact spectral. And as it applies to our work, of course, it means that, digital knowledge is not just a switch, right? It's not like, people are digital natives or they're not, or they come to us with the digital knowledge switch flipped down and we flip it up for them. And now they are digitally knowledgeable. It's much more, it's not like that. It's spectral, right? It's much more like this. No, it's like, it's this. Spectral in the sense that there's a range that students can be at any given point, right? And so we try to move students along the spectrum of digital knowledge, right? Moving them further from 0, closer to 11, right? Further from less, or away from less digital knowledge towards more digital knowledge. Away from technology hates me on one end to I work for Google, right? And of course, we don't ever really get someone entirely along that spectrum, right? They don't come to us technologically averse, and then by the end of the time that they leave us, they are, wizards of technology. They're Bill Gates. No, usually they're make sure that everything's going okay here. Yeah. Okay. And So, no, usually we're meeting them either at the like very low end of the spectrum, right? They're super technologically averse, and we get them to the point where they have the skills to accomplish the project that's in front of them right now, right? Or we meet them at the point where they've been playing around with the tool, they see that there's some additional functionality out there, and they just want to know how they can take this to the next level. Or we meet them and they like have been really diving into the tool, they've been doing some interesting things, and now they have an idea for a really crazy project they want to accomplish, but they don't quite have the tools or the resources to do it, right? And so our office, the Digital Knowledge Center, is designed to help students at any point of that spectrum. So we have different services, different programs to help at all different levels. So we're going to talk through some of those. Shannon's going to kick us off with consultations.
Yeah. So consultations are kind of the bread and butter of what we do. It's what we were kind of founded to do. So our consultants are peer tutors. They meet one-on-one with students. And the vast majority of consultations are helping students at this maybe lower end of the spectrum. You know, a lot of students may be comfortable with consuming with their technology, but a lot of them have not necessarily been asked to produce. I think we maybe assume that because they had to go through COVID, or that they're always on their machines, or, you know, looking at their machines, right? How old am I? Their phones, like that they know how to do these things. But as you probably all know, this is not necessarily true. So we help students, and by we, I mean our amazing student staff, help students get started with, say, video editing, building websites, and other skills that get them pointed in the right direction. So, you know, our goal is not only to help them practically with like their project, right? We hope by the end of it, they also just feel more confident in future projects as well. Part of, you know, the advantage of having students helping other students is they can see a student who's maybe just a little bit further down the road from them, right? You know, it's different when you're a professional staff and they just know that you know that. Seeing a student do those things, I think helps students see that, you know what, maybe I could build that skill, and that maybe they don't even need the DKC into the future, or they'll come back for that next level, and that they can keep coming back again and again. And I think the best moments are when a student comes in dreading a project. You know, they come in saying, technology hates me, or I'm really not looking forward to this. And by the end of that consultation, they're excited about it. And it's not like every consultation is like this, but it does happen. And those are some of my favorite, some of the best moments that happen in consultations. So, you know, like I said, consultations help our faculty do bigger asks of students because they know they have resources that they can point to. We support them, and the students feel supported across their classes. So while consultations are an important part of the work we do, there are also other ways that we help students along the spectrum. So now we're going to talk a little bit about workshops, and I'm going to let Cartland kind of get to that.
Sure, workshops, right? They often get a bad rap, but we actually are a huge fan of workshops. We get really excited about the workshop series that we put on because these are all student-led workshops, right? So we have students attending them, students leading them, and we're just working with the student presenters to develop that workshop into an effective event, right? And this can help the attendees of the workshop to move a little bit further along the spectrum, right? Because we try to do workshops that are really focused on a really specific digital skill, right? Something that a student can come to this workshop with a little bit of knowledge maybe, and then leave with an understanding of how to do this one thing with this digital tool, right? So the students that attend get a benefit, but we also see a huge benefit for the presenters. And this is really why we get excited about it, because it's such a great opportunity for these presenters to dig deeper into this thing that they already know about, this digital skill that they have. You know, if you want to learn something, teach it to somebody else. And these students get that experience of figuring out not just how to do the thing, but how to explain it to somebody else, which is a great experience for them. We work with them to make it into an effective presentation, effective workshop, and we keep that event up on our website in perpetuity so that they can link back to it on their resume. They can talk about it in job interviews, shows up in their SEO, you know, if their name is Googleable. It's something that can continue to help them build as time goes on, right? This is sort of what the process looks like. We get proposals from students. Sometimes it's our own DKC consultants, but more often than not, it's students like club leaders from outside of our organization, or from outside of the DKC, or just students that have seen our ads on campus. So we try to get the entire UMW community. Anybody can propose a workshop. And so we meet with them, we have a jam session where we talk about this workshop idea that they have, hammer it out, get it into a format that we think is gonna work as be beneficial for students. We get them to rehearse it for us, so they do we get a private performance of this workshop. Me, Shannon, and usually our student workshop coordinator get a private rehearsal where we can give some tweaks, give some notes about the process, make sure it's all polished, ready to go, and then they take it and run that workshop entirely themselves. Here's just a couple of them that we've done, and these are some of our marketing materials, which is another big part that we take on, important part for us, because students doing a lot of work to put this whole thing together, develop a good workshop. We want to try to make sure they have an audience, right? So we do a lot of work to make these ads, get them out on various marketing platforms, make sure that there's going to be people at these events. So far, we haven't had a zero attendance one, so it's good. But things like building websites, making web comics, creating in Photoshop. We've done animation, we've done a DJing workshop, all sorts of things. We really take all comers, any sort of digital skill. So that about sums up the workshops. What's next, Shannon?
Well, I think we're going to talk about fellowships. So what are fellowships? So one thing I didn't mention too, if you're unfamiliar with Mary Washington, we are primarily an undergraduate school. We do have some graduate students too, and that's the primary body of students we are working with. So they are usually unfamiliar with the idea of a fellowship in the first place, right? This very academic term in some cases, but our whole idea here is to give students a semester or potentially longer to engage with a digital project that they're passionate about. So these projects are proposed by students and they're supported by mentorship, resources, and a bit of financial incentive from us to accomplish this. And all we ask kind of in return is that they just share what they learn with us and the broader UW community. And this has ranged from video projects, 3D design and printing, webcomics, and I'll talk about some of the 2 examples of fellowships briefly, but I want to talk a little bit about just the process of going through the fellowship. So, kind of like the workshops, they propose something to us. They fill out a little form, give us a basic idea of what they're thinking about doing, and then we have an initial meeting. So we can get a sense of what their goals are, and to give them an overview of like what is expected of a fellowship. I think a lot of students are surprised that we don't want to dictate actually what the outcome is. Like that is up to them. This is for them. We just want to help them get there. So once we've agreed, we create a project contract. This sets up the core scaffolding that will guide us through the semester and is a document we return to again and again. This includes the goals for their project, the deliverables to us, such as maybe doing a workshop or keeping a blog throughout the process, and an initial timeline of what it's going to look like week to week. And I will emphasize this is especially important, I feel like, for undergraduate students. This timeline includes meeting with us every 2 weeks. So a lot of time on our part to be dedicating to meeting with students. We meet again and again just to keep them on track. They're updating us with how things are going. Do we need to adjust things? But by the end, we end up with a product or a project that the students are usually happy with as well. So what are some of the cool things students have done? I want to highlight these 2 because the first one demonstrates the potential iterative nature, and the second one because it also demonstrates the niche that the fellowship that we offer can fill for some students. So on the slide here, you can see a picture of successful 3D printing and a little bit of a fail, which is also part of any learning process, right? So AJ, he started coming to the DKC just to print out things for fun. We get a lot of students like that, but then his interests evolved, and he, to be noted, he plays for the pipe band here at Mary Washington. We have a pipe band. They lead graduation procession, do other things. And he was interested in 3D printing a practice bagpipe chanter. So it looks like a little recorder that you can play. And he found a design and printed it out, but he wasn't satisfied with it. And this inspired him to apply for a fellowship. So he spent a semester teaching himself 3D design and made his own entire chanter, designed it from scratch. At the end of the semester, he had printed out enough to give to the entire pipe band, which was pretty neat. But of course, he wasn't satisfied just with that. This inspired him to go on. And so he has been working and is currently working on printing a full set of pipes so that he can play it at his upcoming graduation when the pipe band processes which we think is pretty cool, that he is able to print his own and play it, while going. And I'll also note that he's been doing research, and the design he's come up with for these pipes is uniquely his own. He isn't copying anybody's. He did some research about this stuff and is doing an innovative design, which is super neat, too. A cool outcome from this fellowship. Turning a little bit away from 3D printing and design, I want to talk about Liam and Jean. They just recently graduated, but Liam was a political science major and Jean was a historic press major. But most importantly, I think they have a deep passion and love for webcomics and webcomic history. So they saw the fellowship as an opportunity to engage in a project that didn't easily slot into any of their respective majors. They created not just a webcomic, but a whole fictional meta-narrative around being an archivist who is following a creator from 2008. So they've created webcomics that imitate a 2008 style and then have this commentary level about discovering these comics and what was happening to this creator throughout the year 2008. You lived through the year 2008, you may remember it was an election year. So this, and all the things that were going on during that time. So they've done a ton of research to inform this comic because they don't really remember actually the year 2008. They were very young, right? They were but small children. And honestly, I'll say for this one, Cartland and I were super jazzed to help support this because we actually remember living through that, and we were big fans of webcomics during this time. And so it's been great on the level of just having conversations with students about something that we can also share back on. So, fellowships engage students kind of at that higher end. They're spending a lot of time. But the biggest advantage of the fellowships, I think, is us giving them the scaffolding to make that large project happen. And hopefully by the time they get to the end of this, they can also start to think about if they want to do another project to the future, what does it take to actually accomplish a large scale project? So that bit of management and processing when you want to do something that is maybe complex. So that's fellowships. And speaking of management and process and doing things, let's talk about employment. Cartland?
Employment gets a bad rap, but a lot of good can come out of employment. So this, as we said earlier, we have the DKC consultants. They're the main function of the DKC, right? And what's great about DKC consultants, we have about 12 of them every year, or in any given year, we have about 12, and we get to work with those students for 2 to 3 years. So this is really the closest we get to potentially seeing a student all the way across the spectrum of digital knowledge, right? Because we don't hire just on digital know-how. We don't hire people that are already experts at video production or already experts at web design or things like that. And necessarily, we might hire somebody who is pretty well developed in these areas, but that's not exclusively what we're looking for. We're looking for the interest in teaching people and helping people, that desire, the drive to learn these tools and dig deeper into them, because we want them to learn a bunch of different tools, not just one thing that they're super passionate about, right? And so we might see somebody come in with very little web design knowledge, web building knowledge, and then work with them over the course of 2 to 3 years, and by the end have them starting a web design consulting firm, which one of our students did. And so each consultant we work with, of course, we're meeting at a different level, right? And some have more experience, some have less, and they're all working their way through this experience. But all of them are getting a lot more benefit from this experience, right? Than probably the most of any of the students we work with, because we get to work with them for such a long time and really let them develop their skills. Plus, they are demonstrating and learning what we think is the most critical piece of digital knowledge, which is to be comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing, right? And figuring out things that you don't initially know, right? Because a lot of times in these consultations, students will come to them with problems that they have never seen before, and they have to work with that student to figure it out. Right? Of course, they have us as a backstop, they have a lot of supports, but one of the greatest things that they do is show these students that it is possible to figure these things out. It is okay to not know this thing and to have to go to Google to do that search and dig deep into the forums to find the answer. Okay? That is the most valuable skill we can teach them, and also the most valuable thing they can model for the students that come into the center. And with that, we are approaching the end of the spectrum of this presentation, and we would love to open things up to questions from you all.
I see, I think there are some questions in the chat already. I'm gonna stop the share.
Stop this share. Oh, here it is. Oh, Paul Burnham's here.
Oh, hey, Paul.
I think I had the first question in the chat.
All right.
It was, do you take the time to teach your students why all your dials go to 11?
Ooh, I think we would be embarrassed to ask that question. I don't know how many people know that reference.
Yeah.
No, it's gonna add that to the training though.
Okay, in the training for next year.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Mhm.
for sure.
If you were starting the Digital Knowledge Center from scratch tomorrow at SUNY Oneonta, what would you need to get started?
Shannon Hauser.
Yeah, right, Martha Bird, it's called her up, what would you need to get started? Besides money, we'll just assume that this does actually cost money, right? We'll give, maybe everybody's into the idea, right?
I mean, I think it's a full-time staff member.
Yeah, it's people, I mean, ultimately, and that's like where I think the main money goes towards is like, people make this work happen. I know, Ed, you were at our Reclaim Open presentation, I believe. And we had a final bit about like this work, and it's like, is this work scalable? Not really, like, the amount of time that Cartland and I put into workshops and fellowships, we couldn't do that for 1,000 students. It's impossible to do. I mean, even our consultants couldn't probably meet with 1,000 students. But the more people you can have dedicated to these things, the more likely it is you can do that further reach. And I feel like hopefully this came across too, that we're spending time in those rich kind of moments, right? Twisting that workshops are not necessarily just for the attendees, but for that presenter to get that little bit of something, and more. So investment in people, and it helps to have an engaged faculty in the first place who want to do the work of implementing this stuff. I don't know what the consultants would do if our faculty were not engaged in this kind of digital assignments. They probably entertain themselves, but they would not be helping students, because the vast majority of students who are coming in are needing help with an assignment in their class. So engagement with your faculty. So, and we do a lot of that work too. I mean, we lead the student piece, but a part of the work that drives that is that we meet with faculty to talk about digital assignments. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, I wanted to ask, and you might have mentioned it and I might have missed it, but how many faculty would you say are giving these kinds of assignments, and how are they distributed across the disciplines?
And it's hard to put a number. Right?
Yeah, we should have done some data find. It's been a while since we looked at it. I know Jerry's in this room right now too. If he has a number off the top of his head, he's our boss. If he had thought, I don't know, how many class visits do we even do this semester?
Oh yeah,
That might be a good starting point.
this semester we do about 30 some. In the fall we do more because we do our freshman seminars in the fall, and a lot more of those kind of want some of that input. It's hard. It's really hard to put a number, but I will say that it's very spread across disciplines, and we're seeing more and more uptake in disciplines that were traditionally averse to it as well.
Right.
It's like classics and English is doing a lot more. I feel like history has always been a big buy-in here at UMW at least.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we push really hard on that thing I mentioned in the beginning, is that like we try to make it explicitly clear to faculty that they don't need to be the experts in this, right? And I think more and more faculty believe us on this, because the biggest, I mean, maybe use your experience, if one faculty member tells another faculty member that thing is true, then it leads to, right? So if you can get just a couple faculty members who maybe aren't necessarily even viewed as like being technology people, like we had one political science professor come in to help with this little workshop we were doing, because he engages students in blogging. He would probably call himself a technophobe or whatever, but we have more people show up to that because they saw he was gonna be there. I think like we're like, okay, well, if Jason Davidson can do this, like maybe I can do this. Like so like having people who are also ambassadors but not necessarily at the top of the like, well, I do these deep projects or I know the thing really well. I think that matters a lot. That faculty word of mouth, just like student word of mouth matters for stuff we do. I think.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I was wondering about the impact on faculty. That is, I'm assuming that you get a fair number of faculty who are willing to have students do digital projects, but they appreciate you because they, the faculty member, are not really prepared to provide the support that the student needs. And I can imagine you've got a good number of faculty who also they don't want to touch it either, right? Let the Digital Knowledge Center take care of it.
Yeah.
But there's an opportunity in the work you're doing to actually, even through the work that the students do, to give faculty greater confidence working with these tools, or ideas for how they might use the tools for scholarly projects of their own.
Sure. Yeah, and we do see people kind of moving up that, like we see faculty moving up that digital knowledge spectrum as well, honestly. As people who will first change a paper into a podcast, right? And then that just starts them down the road. And they're like, well, but what if we started publishing these on a website, or we did, they start taking it up to the next level further and further.
Yeah.
And it can be very productive for the faculty as well.
That's great. Thank you.
I think question is, that one made me laugh about the confusion about the name.
Yeah. Well, I think particularly because we have two units, right? So we have the Digital Knowledge Center, which is the student-facing side. We help students with their digital projects. And then we have Digital Learning Support, which is the faculty-facing side, which Shannon and I are also a part of, right? So, and then Jerry is the director. So, and we've basically just given up on making everybody understand the distinction between those two.
Yeah, it made sense. So too, this is there was at one point 6 people in what was before Digital Learning Support, DTLT, the thing I mentioned earlier, and then I don't know, it is kind of a mess. So we just we have to route emails sometimes. Students really get the idea that the Digital Knowledge Center is for them. Everything else is kind of, I think, squishy, when it comes to faculty, and they're like, who do I talk to about this thing? We're like, I don't know, just email one of us, it'll get to the right place.
And we definitely also, like we said at the beginning, that WTF is a DKC. We get that when we're tabling at open houses. People don't know what a digital knowledge center is, right? I think people avoid our booths because they just don't understand what it is. They're going to the speaking and writing center right next to us. They're doing the same kind of work for different kinds of projects, but they just don't know what we do.
Yeah, I will say that we got a 3D printer to bring to open houses with us, and that seems to just at least draw people to the table in the first place, and then they might ask the question. We have thought about making a sign that is ask us what a digital knowledge center is, just because it is. Yeah.
So if you solve that naming problem.
Yeah, if you figure out the naming stuff, we would love to know, because we've wrestled with it for years, and we inherited stuff, and then we just, I don't know, we do the best. There's only 3 of us that do this work, so it kind of makes it easy to figure out who stuff should go to, because there's not a lot of us to somebody's gonna do it.
Don't forget about the students that are coming to UMW after they see you at those tables.
Yes.
So
Sure.
definitely have some of those too that are like, you can have a what, and what they do what. So It's
People do
exciting.
get excited about that.
Yeah.
We always get at least one or two at each open house event. That's like, oh, man, they didn't have this at the last school I went to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Terminology is hard.
And I think it's hard too, to want to name it something too, and then also let the space evolve too, like the way the Digital Knowledge Center was when it was founded in 2014. What some of the stuff we do now is different, not be, better or worse, but like the work has also evolved too. So like getting hyper specific, I feel like sometimes like makes it hard to allow that. In any particular, I mean, that way Digital Knowledge Center is kind of so broad, it's like, well, it's whatever we want it to be. Like, we could shut it down tomorrow and like suddenly help people with something completely different, and it could probably still count as a Digital Knowledge Center. We just wouldn't be helping. We try to aim to help the people that are here, right? Like that is, and that just as the curriculum changes or what, we've had a huge growth in our communication and digital studies major. As you can imagine, that's impacted some of the work that we do. Like we just see a lot more stuff coming out of that major too, so.
We're at
Yeah.
time. Can I invite you to sum up and give
Yeah.
us your final thoughts?
Shannon?
Yeah, right. I was gonna say, if this has existed at Mary Washington for a decade. So maybe you can't implement a whole like digital knowledge center, but hopefully you can take away some of the small things, especially if you do have the opportunity to work with students. Thinking about, especially maybe workshops might be a good place. Maybe it's not necessarily about the attendees, those are important, but like, how can you help students become teachers? What are the opportunities to let students engage more deeply in those things? But if you do have suddenly the money and time and professional things, we would love to talk about that. I think we would love to have more places like ours, that, almost everybody has faculty development around these things, but like, how can where's the student development happening? And I think it's easy to argue those things, especially if you already are supporting students, say around speaking and writing and all. This is like another obvious avenue I think people can advocate for. So, yes, so that is my summation.
Thank
I
you so
concur.
much. I appreciate you so much coming here and speaking to us about this and your leadership in this field.
Yeah, thank you
Ditto.
all.
Good.
Yeah. Thanks a million. It's great.
Have a
Yes,
good afternoon. Thank you to our